Hey there guys, I'm Byron with Diemension Games, and today I'd like to introduce you to the first in our new series, Diemension Games Home Movies. That's right, these are low quality, off-the-cuff little videos that we're just going to do for you guys, so sorry in advance about the quality. The components here, as you'll see, are things I just printed off my home printer. They are not the official cards. In fact, they're not even the same size as the official cards. For some reason, they printed big, which I didn't realize until it was too late. But anyways, so these are not the finalized components. These will not just be a little... yeah, anyways. So definitely not the finalized components here. The minis you're seeing are ones I 3D printed too. But we just wanted to kind of go into some more details about some of the fables, starting off with one of my favorites, the Little Mermaid. So you'll see here, up here are her fable's special rules. She starts off the game by placing a tentacle in her space. She can have more than one tentacle in one space at a time. And there can be more than one space at a time, not only in her space, but say in Sleeping Beauty's space right here. So Sleeping Beauty could get overwhelmed and flooded with tentacles, and that's going to be a good time for everyone involved. She also has a couple actions on here. She has action discard a movement card or a wild card from your hand to choose and move a tentacle up 2 movement spaces. So say she has a level 3 movement card. She could discard this, meaning she doesn't get power for it. She's just discarding it. So she'd discard this to her discard pile, and then she would be able to move the tentacle up to 3 spaces. So let's say that that tentacle was in her space still. So that would move 3 spaces, 1, 2, 3. Except it would be up to 3 spaces, so she would actually want it right there. So another thing that you might notice here, looking at her special rules, is that after she chooses her epic card, she places it in front of her as a new twist instead of adding it to her hand. So her epic cards are actually twist cards rather than skill cards. Most fables have skill cards for their epics, in that they would go in the discard pile after they're used, and then they recycle through the deck. Hers are always active. And so we'll get into that a little bit later as we get into her epics, but that's just where that is for now. When you switch fighting tracks in 2v2 mode, the tentacles switch fighting tracks along with you. So that just means in the 2v2 mode, she would be up here, she'd be here, there'd be 2 other fables here. If she switched tracks to down here, then all her tentacles would come with her. Okay, well, let's start getting into her skill decks. So her attack skill, specifically the one that will go with the basic attack cards, will do range 1, damage 1 plus attack. If the opponent is in a tentacle space, gain damage plus 1. If you're in a tentacle space, gain 1 power. Little Mermaid's cards all have a very interesting component to them. They have one ability that is specifically for hurting an enemy, and they have another ability that's specifically for helping you. So if the tentacle is in the same space as you, the helping one would go into effect. If the tentacle is in the same space as her opponent, then the negative one for the opponent would go into effect. So in this case, she would gain damage plus 1 if this was in her space, and she would gain 1 power if that was in her space. So Little Mermaid's cards, so obviously this is just an upgraded version of Siren's Call. This just increases it to range 2, damage 2 plus attack, then damage plus 2 and 2 power, depending. And so I should also probably mention too, these can both be activated if you have the tentacles. So if there's a tentacle right here and a tentacle right there, these would both be activated. But you'd have to have a tentacle in both spaces, which is probably not real likely, but hey, you never know. So moving down her deck a little bit then, you have Raging Tempest. When the opponent is in a tentacle space, you can use attack actions against her, ignoring the range 1 requirement. So that's cool. So you would just put this twist card down here. This would now be activated for the rest of the game. So when the opponent is in a tentacle space, you can use attack actions against her, ignoring the range 1 requirement. That means that she can now use just a regular attack card, even though these are always range 1, to still hit her opponent. So that's very cool, as long as the tentacle is in her space. So if the tentacle moves out of her space, then, obviously that's not going to work anymore. But she still could use that as long as the tentacle is right there. So then we've got Siren Shriek. This is just an upgraded version of Siren's Call and Siren's Song. It does range 3, damage 3 plus attack, then damage plus 3 if there's a tentacle there, and 3 power if she's in a tentacle space. So these cards are very useful. So then we get to the bottom of her deck, and at the bottom of every Fables skill deck is another twist card. These are going to be normally, for most Fables, these are the same across all 3 of their skill decks. That is the case for Little Mermaid. And when you get to the bottom here, you get immediately gain a new tentacle and place it on any space of your fighting track, or place it on your Fable sheet if the epic card, the Kraken Stirs, is in play. Then destroy this card. So rather than putting this one here, you would just add a new tentacle, say like what we've done right there, and then this would be destroyed from the game, meaning it's just removed from this particular game. So let's move on to her defense skills. This is Surging Wrath. If the opponent is in a tentacle space, inflict defense damage on her. You may place yourself into a tentacle space and then gain defense 1. Cannot be in the same space as the opponent. So for this card, you would take a defense card and you would play this with this. So now she would inflict 2 damage on her opponent because she used a level 2 defense card. You may place yourself into a tentacle space and then gain defense 1. Cannot be in the same space as the opponent. So say a tentacle was right here, she could teleport herself right there and then gain 1 defense. So, and then Erupting Wrath, this is just the upgraded version. So this one she would gain defense 2 rather than defense 1. Let's see here. Let's get down to her next twist. So her next twist is Mystic Echoes. And while you are in a tentacle space, the damage inflicted on you each time is reduced by 1. Every relic card in a tentacle space is treated as in the same space as you. Relic mode only. So this is actually very powerful too. So while she's in a tentacle space, the damage inflicted is reduced by 1. So basically the tentacle becomes like a damage sponge. So that's awesome. The other thing too is we've got this tentacle all the way still over here. And so she is now counted as being in this space. So she could use Tales Retold, choose and shuffle up to the level of cards from your discard pile back into your deck. So she could use this relic card. Okay, so the way relic cards work too is you would discard a skill card to make this work. So that symbol right there is the same as this symbol here. So that just means if she discarded this, then she could shuffle up to 2 cards from her discard pile back into her deck. So she could use that card though, even though she's not on the relic card like she normally would have to be because there's a tentacle there. So moving further down, we have Avenging Wrath. This one gives her defense 3. And there's 3 of those. And then once again, we have Rising Tide. So she would get another tentacle. And she could place that on any place of the fighting track. Then she would destroy this card. So it would be removed from the game. So her last skill deck here is the Encroaching Sea. So this one, she would choose a tentacle and move it 1 to movement spaces. After that, if you're in a tentacle space, draw 1 card. So she could move this tentacle over to her, and then she would draw a card from her deck. So we'll just say that she's got a deck right here, so she could draw this card now. So that's very useful. Level 2, it's basically the same thing, except now she can draw 2 cards. If the opponent is in a tentacle space, she must discard 1 card from her hand. Ha 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 ha. So that could be useful too if you can get one of the tentacles in her space. Level 3, is the same 1 to movement spaces. So if she used a level 2 movement card here, then she would move 1 to 2, or the tentacle would move 1 to 2 spaces. So that's what that means. So let's take a look at her epic cards here. So her first one is the Purging Flood. When a tentacle enters an opponent's space for any reason, that opponent loses 1 HP. When an opponent enters a space containing tentacles for any reason, she loses X HP. X is equal to the number of tentacles in that space. So this could potentially be pretty damaging for Sleeping Beauty. So, say this tentacle moves into her space, she's going to lose 1 HP. However, say there's a space over here that has 2 tentacles, and she moves there, she's now going to lose 2 HP because of this epic card. And this card would just be put down here, accompanying Little Mermaid's other twists. So, but that's not all she can choose from. She also has Restoring Waters. So the max HP is reduced to 18, which I believe is her epic threshold. Yes. So she can no longer restore health past her epic threshold. However, at the end of each turn, or at the end of each of your turns, recover 2 HP. So say your opponent knocks you down here, you're going to be able to restore 2 HP at the end of your turn. So that could be the difference between life and death right there if you're able to get that HP at the end of your turn. Now, the last one she has is the Kraken Stirs. Move the current tentacles onto your Fable sheet. The damage inflicted on you each time is reduced by X. X is equal to the number of tentacles on your Fable sheet. Your skill cards now become their required basic cards of the same level. You must lose 1 HP at the end of each of your turns. So let's unpack this card a little bit, because this is definitely her most complex one. But it's also probably her most interesting. So she would move, if she chose this as her epic, she would move all of her tentacles, we'll say she had 2 there, onto her Fable sheet. Now, the damage inflicted on her each time by Sleeping Beauty would now be reduced by these 2 tentacles. So it's basically built-in defense. It's like a tentacle shield wrapped around her and absorbing nasty effects. So that could be extremely useful right there. So the other thing is she no longer has skill cards. She instead only has basic cards. So that sounds pretty awful, right? But here's the thing. If you're doing that, you have every card in your hand is now usable every turn. So say she had a couple of Avenging Wraths and a couple of Encroaching Seas. These would now be movement cards, but they're level 3 movement cards and level 3 defense. And then if she's got one of these, she's got now level 3 attacks. So she could just wallop the competition potentially using these now basic cards that no longer requires another card to activate them. The other advantage to this is now if she's doing this, she's getting a ton of power. So she could just be completely power mad basically and grab all of the cards and all the tentacles, and so that's one of the advantages to that card right there. So one more twist that I forgot to go over before, because it wasn't in my deck, was Daughter of Oceans. So this goes in the Encroaching Sea deck of her movement skills. And this particular twist is, after you use a move action, you may choose and move a tentacle up to X spaces. X is equal to movement divided by 2, round down, you gained during this move action. So let's say she used 2 movement cards. So this would be a total of 5 movement. So in this case, she would have moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then she could use a tentacle here. Let's say the tentacle is right there or right here. So she would divide this by 2. So 2 divided by 5, obviously it's 2.5, so she would move 2 spaces for this tentacle. 1, 2 spaces. And now, if she already had her loses 1 HP, then Sleeping Beauty would lose 1 HP, or however that happened to go. That's not a guarantee, obviously. That just depends on what twists you have and that sort of thing in play. But so that's the Daughter of Oceans card, which I forgot to get to earlier. My bad. So this has been a little bit of a look into how Little Mermaid works and plays in Twisted Fables. So you're not going to get all of these cards during one particular game of Twisted Fables unless you just have tons of power and you're able to maybe get this guy, and then you just keep going and gaining power and that sort of thing. Chances are you're going to have to, in a normal game, you would have to really craft your strategy around your opponent, what your opponent is doing, how your opponent is acting, and you would need to craft your deck in a way that reacts to and is able to take the fight to your opponent. So that's just one of the levels of strategies there. So all of these cards that I've shown you, you wouldn't be able to play in a single game. However, hopefully this does still give you a better idea of how Little Mermaid works and how she functions. Tentacles are very important to her, as they are to so many of us, really. I mean, who doesn't love a good tentacle? So anyways, this is Byron with Diemension Games. I hope you found this video interesting, and I will talk with you soon. Bye for now.